I am a former Army interrogator, human intelligence collector. I was trained by the United States government to analyze your language, body language, posture to identify deception. I did it in the real world through interrogations, through source operations, and through strategic debriefings. I've got tons of certifications. I'm an expert at this.
You guys get ready to leave out of there, getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. That is critically important information. Right here, he's talking about when his buddy Bart pulls out his buddy Wyatt's boat. So Bart is on one boat and he's pulling out Wyatt's boat. Wyatt's boat is the one that you've heard about was taken on water and sinking, and that's why they had to leave Horn Island. I want you to pay attention to this.
To where we're out of all this, all this chaos, because we left at 4:30 and there was still.
We left at 4:30. We left at 4:30. This guy just said that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. Very specific time. Now, how did he know it was 3 o'clock? Brandon Tatum didn't ask him that. If this was an interrogation, that's a key question I would ask. How do you know it was 3 o'clock?
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Katie.
That's Katie McCormick that he's talking about. Katie McCormick said that's not true, but let's listen. This is at 3 o'clock. This happened at 3 o'clock.
And Nolan was sitting there, and the last time I saw him, I looked at Nolan, and Nolan was like shaking his head, laughing. That was the last time I laid eyes on him. But when we were leaving,
well, when we were leaving, so it would be 4:30, because he's already said we were leaving at 4:30.
Nolan was sitting by the boat.
Nolan was sitting by the boat. How do you know, Warren, that Nolan was sitting by the boat? The last time you laid eyes on him was at 3 o'clock. It's now 4:30. This is your timeline. Timeline is everything. At this part of the story, he's at 4:30. But he just said less than a minute ago, 2 minutes ago, that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and
how do you know that? The last time you laid eyes, your exact words, on him was 3 o'clock. You're now talking about 4:30. Now listen what happens next.
My buddy yelled for Nolan. Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving.
Now, in the interest of honest analysis here, if they were both on the boat and he heard his buddy yelling at Nolan, not him, by the way. Warren wasn't yelling at Nolan. Even in his own story, he wasn't looking for Nolan or yelling for Nolan. And in the beginning of part 1 of the interview, he says, Nolan was like a brother to me. He was my best friend. More than a friend, though. He was like a brother to me. But Warren's not the one looking for Nolan, not the one yelling for Nolan. He don't even go over and lay eyes on him again, according to his own story that he's telling us. But he hears his buddy saying, hey, Nolan.
The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear. It's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on.
So your buddy asked Nolan multiple times, and you never did. Your brother, your best friend. But notice he didn't say Nolan said, I'm going to stay here with Katie who I'm sitting with next to the boat. No part of that exchange would have given Warren the details to know that Nolan was sitting by the boat with Katie, which was his exact words. He contradicted himself. That's blatant deception. It needs to be immediately exploited and interrogated.
At 4:31 in the afternoon on the 4th of July, a boat pulled away from Horn Island, Mississippi, carrying 6 friends home from a holiday on the water. An 18-year-old named Nolan Wells was not one of them. 2 days later, a park ranger found his body in the same water he'd been swimming in hours earlier. What happened in the 90 minutes before that boat left the island has been picked apart by investigators, family, and millions of strangers online for weeks. But there is one detail almost nobody caught. Buried inside a friendly, sympathetic interview meant to clear his name one of Nolan's closest friends said something that does not add up. Not once, twice, and the two versions cannot both be true. Before we go any further, I want to say this plainly, because our numbers tell us most of you watching right now haven't done it yet. We have a lot more people watching these videos, and we have people actually in this community. And if you want the next update on this case the moment it drops instead of finding it 3 days late in your recommended feed, joining us here is the only way that happens. It costs nothing. It takes 2 seconds. And it genuinely helps a small channel like this one keep covering a story the bigger networks keep dropping. All right, let's get into it. Before we go further, it's worth acknowledging directly why a single missing persons case out of small Mississippi County became a national conversation within days. Because understanding that helps explain everything that's happened since, including how a single interview clip ended up dissected by millions of strangers. This case arrived carrying almost every element that tends to pull a story out of local coverage and into the national conversation. A young, well-liked victim with a promising future cut short. A friend group offering an account that shifted and in places contradicted itself. A family that felt, rightly or not, that the initial investigation moved too quickly toward conclusion. And a set of viral claims, some true and some fabricated, that spread faster than official verification ever could. Add prominent public figures lending their platforms and resources to the family's cause. And you have all the ingredients for a story that outgrows its original scope within a matter of days. That's not a criticism of the attention this case has received. Nolan Wells deserves exactly this level of scrutiny applied to finding out what actually happened to him. But it does mean that separating signal from noise here requires more discipline than a typical case, because there is simply more noise, more incentive to distort details for engagement, and more pressure on every party involved, investigators, family, friends, and media alike, to shape their public statements under a level of scrutiny most people never have to experience even once in their lives, let alone in the middle of grieving someone they loved. Before we talk about a boat, a timeline, or an interview clip that's been picked apart frame by frame online, we need to talk about who Nolan Wells actually was. Because somewhere in the last month, he stopped being a person to a lot of people on the internet and started being a case number, a set of contradictions, a debate topic. That's not fair to him. And we're not going to do that here. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He just graduated from Ocean Springs High School, and by every account from people who actually knew him, not people arguing about him online, he was the kind of teenager parents hope for. He played football. He'd started the recruitment and enrollment process at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he planned to keep playing. Friends describe him as big-hearted, the kind of person who made people feel noticed in a room. Not the loudest person there, but the one who remembered your name and asked how your week was going. The night before the 4th of July, Nolan cooked salmon for his parents. That's confirmed by his mother, Christine Wansley, in multiple interviews since his death. He hugged her, told her he loved her, and left to spend the night at a friend's house ahead of the holiday trip. That's the last time she saw her son in person. Not a dramatic goodbye. An ordinary one. The kind every parent has had 100 times without ever thinking it might be the last. On the morning of July 4th, Nolan headed out with a group of friends toward Horn Island, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, reachable only by private boat. No buildings, no cell towers to speak of, just sand, water, and on a holiday weekend, hundreds of other boaters doing exactly what Nolan's group was doing, celebrating. He was last seen, according to multiple accounts we'll walk through in detail, wearing blue swim trunks, no shirt, sunglasses pushed up on his head, energetic, social, the kind of presence that made an afternoon better just by being in it. That's who Nolan Wells was before any of this happened. Hold on to that person as we walk through what comes next, because it gets complicated, it gets contested, and it gets ugly in the comment sections of every video covering this case, including, honestly, some of ours. But underneath every argument about timelines and phones, and who said what, there's an 18-year-old who cooked his parents' dinner 2 nights before he died, and who is not walking through that door again. That's the fact that doesn't get to be disputed, no matter which side of this you land on by the end of this video.
I mean, Nolan was like a brother to me. Nolan lit up every room he walked in. 4th of July, everybody was out there. Nolan rode out on the Triton, and then we had a Palm Beach, 18 Palm Beach. There was 4 guys on that. The rest of the group, which was ranged from maybe 10 to 15 or 16 people on my buddy's tide line.
Yeah, so y'all pretty much having a good time. And then you guys get ready to leave prematurely.
Right.
And like, what? Explain that, because you guys got there around 10.
Yeah.
It's now 4:30.
Right.
People are still out there partying and
Correct.
they're having a good time, but something happened to where it necessitated you guys to get the boat up and running. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So I had a girl come up to me and say, "Hey, your brother just got in a fight." And obviously I have a younger brother, and that's who she was talking about. And I was freaked out. So I walked over to the beach, and I didn't walk over, I ran over. I made a beeline, I didn't talk to anybody, put my drink down and walked over there. And my brother was kind of angry, and there was a lot going on, but someone was getting pulled away. I don't know who it was. And my brother was like, "Oh, I just got in a fight, and this guy punched me in the face," and I punched him right back. And then went to the ground, and my brother put him in an arm bar. And
Was Nolan involved in any of this?
Absolutely not. When I was over there was a bunch of younger guys like my brother's age, and I mean, Nolan, I never saw Nolan over there.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And okay, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
So you get ready to go. There's an issue with the boat.
Okay, yeah.
And this is
Well,
what
yeah, this
ended
led up to that. That's what I was saying.
So
Okay.
the fight happened with your brother, or a little scuffle. I'm assuming that it was cleared up.
You're right.
You got your brother out of that
Right.
situation, and then how did you find out that this boat is sinking?
Well, I walk back over, and like we're probably around each other for a little bit. I mean, I wasn't thinking anything of it. I told my brother, I pulled my brother off the beach, and I was just like, "Listen, get in the water, hang out with us, calm down." I mean, he was calm, but I didn't want anything else to happen, And so once I got back over to the boat, I got on the Triton, and the Triton had probably about 6 inches of water up to the transom. And I was freaked out because I'm good friends with Wyatt, and that was his boat. And, no water's coming out, no access water's coming out. And it was a big issue, because I think the reason was because there were so many people getting on and off the boat, and at some point the boat was very, very crowded, and there was just a lot of people on, so that it drags water in. And eventually, I think over time, we were out there for a couple hours, the boat just started filling up with water. So I popped the starboard side hatch, and the battery was completely underwater. And so the motor wouldn't trim down. I mean, my buddy would go to trim it down from the console, and it'd trim down, and then it'd come right back up. And so Wyatt's trying to throw a rear anchor, so we're caught, and he's, yelling at people. Everybody's kind of freaking out. And eventually, I'm like yelling at other people, trying to tell them, calm down, like, the boat could possibly sink, and I'm not paying attention to everyone around me. I was paying attention to my buddy's boat. And that's what all my other friends that were on that boat were doing, trying to solve the problem.
So you're on the boat now. The water is getting up to the point where the boat may be disabled to where you couldn't get it out from Horn Island. So what happens after that?
Wyatt jumps to the water, tries to throw a rear anchor, and my buddy Meyer, you're sitting, looking, trying to pull trash out the bilge. And the bilge is basically a pump that pulls the water, the access water out the boat. So the bilge was failing to work. So any excess water was just sitting in the boat. It wasn't getting pumped out. And I looked over the gunnel, and I looked at the release hole for the bilge, and it was even with the water. So, I mean, we're all freaking out. All of our, we're not focused on anything else other than the boat. Well, then eventually my buddy Bart on the tide line is like, "I'm going to pull y'all out to where we're out of all this, all this chaos." Because we left at 4:30, and there were still just as many people there, if not more, than when we got there. I mean, probably around the same amount. I mean, it was crazy. Like, there was a lot of people. And, I mean, eventually Bart pulls us out. You know, we left at 4:30, but we really weren't pulled out away from everybody. We were probably about a quarter mile out, and we had the towing strap pulled from, you know, Bart's port side cleat or starboard side cleat, and he was on our starboard side bow. And so it was rubbing on his power pole. So Bart turned around, pulled up next to our boat, and we were just trying to get it situated. So that's when Wyatt called Cito. And Wyatt was like, you know, calls him, because the cell service isn't great at the island, but once you can use your phone, but stuff might not just send, and like, I mean, it's not great. You know, you got maybe one bar, it won't work that well. But once you get a little off the island, you have cell coverage. And even on the island, like I called my mom when we were on the island, you know, it was fine. Like we had, you know, enough cell coverage to make a phone call or shoot a text over, but you don't have enough cell coverage to like send a picture, for example. So Wyatt.
So I want to go back.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I want to touch on that real quick, because the phone thing came up at some point.
Uh-huh.
And so was it when you guys got off the boat?
Yeah.
I mean, were people taking their phones off the boat, or is that not typical? Because I know that Nolan's phone was left on the boat,
Right.
even though, you know, after you guys had left. So can you explain that? Because I think people need to understand this a little clearer.
Yeah.
Was it typical for people to have their phones left on boats, or did they keep their phones in the water? Or?
Yeah. I mean, everybody kind of goes out to the island to get away from, you know, their phones and everything else. I know I got on the boat to get away from, you know, just the regular world. And no, when you're waist deep in water, no one's carrying their phone in their hand. Especially at Horn Island, the water has been very, very murky because of the rain. And when it's just very risky. If you're gonna have your phone in the water, you know, some people might for a couple minutes and like maybe taking some pictures of each other. You know, I know a lot of girls like to take pictures in the water at Horn Island. You know, guys do too. You know, like people like to take pictures, and but a lot of the pictures you see are on the boat for a reason. And so, no, I mean, if someone is on their phone in the water, they're using it real quick and then putting it right back on the boat. We were all waist deep in water. No one's sitting there scrolling on their phone. I never saw that once. And I've never seen that once. And I've been out the Highland my whole life. I mean, that's just not something people do. People aren't on their phones. And everybody has their phone, yes, but it's always on the boat. No one's getting off the boat with their phone. So.
And so you guys get ready to leave out of there, getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, the last time I saw Nolan was 3:00, and Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie, Katie. And Katie, Nolan was sitting there, and the last time I saw him, I looked at Nolan, and Nolan was like shaking his head laughing, and I was like, dude, you crazy. I was like just joking with him. And, but anyway, Nolan, that was the last time I laid eyes on him. But when we were leaving, obviously, no one is getting left at the island that came with us unless they demanded to, you know, be there and asked, you know. This is a very common thing at Horn Island. When you're out there, a lot of people ride out there with someone and in with somebody else all the time. I've done that 100 times. You know, it's a very common thing. But Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving. The boat's having issues. And like, no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear, but it's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on the boat. Nolan, get on the boat. Get on the boat. We're leaving. If you're coming, you got to come now. And Nolan made a decision to stay out on the island. And like he said, you know.
How many people heard that? Were there just
at least
just a
5
few, or?
I mean, everyone that was on our boat right there, because the Palm Beach had already left. My buddy went ahead and went home on the Palm Beach, and 3 guys on the way back. And Nolan wasn't the only person to ride out there with us and in with somebody else. I mean, we had multiple people in our group that rode out with us and rode in on someone else's boat. And that, like I said, that's not an uncommon thing to do, you know? I mean, a lot of people do that. I could name probably 50 people out there that day that ran out with somebody and ran back in with somebody else. So, I mean, it's not like it's an uncommon thing, but it's not like we just left him there or my friends just left him there. Nolan made a decision to stay on the island after my friends asked him multiple times and told him to get on the boat, and he decided to stay.
And I heard the girl that he was with, Katie, had text somebody that she heard people yelling for Nolan to get on it. Is that true?
Yeah, and I have a picture of that. She texted my buddy, and the next day everybody was panicking and everybody's texting Katie, you know, because she was obviously seen with Nolan the whole day at the island. Katie sent a message to my buddy the next day and said, you know, this is the last time I saw him, you know, he's really sweet. But she also mentioned that the last time she saw Nolan was when my buddy was yelling at him to get on the boat. And she was right there to see that Nolan decided not to.
Yeah, and so you guys get in the boat, you start to get towed in, and you make it back. Now explain how that you get to the point where you were concerned about Nolan, because obviously you said, "Hey, Nolan, y'all need to," or somebody, not
when
you,
did I get
but
to that point?
You guys had made mention Nolan need to get on a boat.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Yeah.
You guys get back to wherever you're going.
Right.
Explain that. Did you guys go back to somebody's house, or you guys like what happened there? And then when did you feel like, well, wait a minute, where's Nolan?
Right. Okay. Well, running in was very chaotic. I mean, Nolan chose to stay on the island, so my focus wasn't on anything else other than the boat, you know, because if the boat doesn't get in, then no one gets in, you know. I don't want to sink out there on my buddy's boat, and no one does. But my buddy Wyatt jumped out and pulled the plug on the boat once we kind of got out there, because he got the motor to trim down. And the motor trimmed down, my buddy Wyatt pulled the plug, and we planed off. We moved all the weight to the front of the boat so we could plane off. And eventually we planed off, and the boat was running. So when you're planed off and you have water in the boat and you're hauling, you know, we're going pretty fast. We're going probably 40, 42 miles an hour. And so all that excess water that was built up in the boat is coming out of the boat. So, I mean, that's what we had to do. So we ran into Fort Bayou, and we didn't just run straight to my buddy's grandparents' house. We ran into Fort Bayou. A couple of us jumped in the water, and Wyatt, like, the whole reason for the stop was so Wyatt could hop in and put the plug back in the boat. So then after that, we went and docked it, and I went back to my buddy's house, and we ate and, you know, napped for a little bit. It was a long day at the island, so, you know, we were all tired. And eventually we go over to a girlfriend of mine. She was having people over for 4th of July. We were doing like fireworks and stuff. So we all went over there to swim and, you know, hang out. And
this infamous picture that I've seen online of Nolan in the water in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Where is this picture associated with? Because you said you guys went back to swim. Nolan wasn't with you. Yeah. So where is this picture at?
People who knew Nolan described a specific kind of personality, the kind that shows up consistently across totally unconnected sources, which is usually a sign you're hearing something real rather than something performed for a camera. His best friend, Javon Williams, has described him in an on-record interview with the Biloxi Sun-Herald as a young man with a lifelong, consistent pattern of behavior. If he rode somewhere with you, he came back with you. That's not a stray comment. Williams repeated that same characterization independently to CNN, describing it as something Nolan had done every single time throughout the years they'd known each other. We'll come back to why that specific detail matters later in this video, because it directly informs how much weight investigators and the public should put on the claim that Nolan simply chose, out of character, to abandon that pattern on the one day it would end up costing him his life. Teachers reached out to the family after his death, unprompted, with stories about him. Classmates did the same. Teammates from both his high school football days and his brief time at the college level described a kid who showed up early, who cheered louder for other people's plays than his own, who had, by every measure that actually matters at 18 years old, a life that was just getting started in exactly the direction he wanted it to go. He wasn't drifting. He had a plan, a program, a position on a roster, and parents who cooked him dinner and packed his gym bag and expected to watch him play college football that fall. None of that makes him a saint, and nobody covering this case honestly is claiming it does. It makes him a normal 18-year-old on the best kind of ordinary trajectory a family could hope for, which is exactly why the sudden, violent interruption of that trajectory deserves the careful, disciplined treatment we're trying to give it here, instead of turning him into either a martyr or a mystery to be solved for entertainment. Let's build the timeline the way investigators have had to build it, piece by piece, from GPS records, dispatch audio, witness statements, and family accounts. We are going to be extremely careful here to separate what has actually been confirmed through documentation from what is being said by people involved, because those are two very different categories of information, and mixing them is exactly how this case has been distorted online for a month. According to GPS data obtained by CBS News and the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, this is confirmed, documented, agency source data, not a claim from either side. The boat carrying Nolan's group left its dock at approximately 9:56 that morning and arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. That part of the day is not in dispute by anyone. The afternoon unfolds the way thousands of holiday afternoons on that stretch of coast unfold every year. Music, boats anchored close together, groups drifting in and out of each other's company on a beach that, according to multiple reports, had upward of 200 people on it that day. Somewhere in that crowd, according to the family's account, Nolan met a young woman. Her name has since become public through her own family statements. Katie. We'll spend significant time on Katie's account later in this video because it matters enormously to the timeline. But for now, here's what's confirmed. Nolan spent part of the afternoon in her company. At some point in the mid-afternoon, the boat Nolan and his friends had coming on, owned by one of the friends in the group, developed a mechanical problem. According to statements from a parent of one of the friends, corroborated by dispatch audio later obtained by NBC News through a public records request, the boat's bilge pump failed and it began taking on water. That audio is confirmed. It's real. It's been obtained through official channels, and it captures the boat operator radioing for towing assistance. According to GPS data, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon. Here is where the timeline stops being simple. Nolan was not on that boat when it left. According to statements from 3 friends who were present and later spoke with investigators, Nolan chose to stay behind, planning to catch a later ride back to the mainland, reportedly with another group, possibly connected to Katie and the people she'd come to the island with. That is the account the friend group has given consistently since this story broke. Nolan's mother disputes key parts of that account, and we're going to walk through exactly where and why, because the disagreement isn't vague. It's specific, and it's about details that should be easy to verify if everyone's memory lines up what Nolan said to whom and at what time. Later that night, around 11 p.m., one of Nolan's friends contacted the Coast Guard. Christine Wansley reported her son missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office that same night.
Nolan Wells, death threats are flying. One actually says there's going to be blood, so much blood. Another death threat says, don't go outside. How can anybody do their jobs when they're getting death threats? Not only that, we understand this case is headed to a grand jury. We also learned tonight that the state's autopsy is complete, but is being kept secret. Isn't an autopsy a public document? Why is it being kept hidden from us, the public? What is in that autopsy, the first autopsy of Nolan Wells?
Young lady Katie that he was hanging out with. I saw a text message from her alluding to the fact that she never saw him get on that boat at all. They could have been saying, don't die or is it dead, referring to the bilge pump. Somebody would have seen something if there was a dramatic commotion like this occurring on that boat.
I hope Nolan Wells died by accident. I'm not shutting down our Crime Stories investigation until I know.
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our village pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can you all please come? We have a membership. Hey, up! Shut the up! What'd you say?
You know, if that sound is real, there's no getting away from that. And all this business about there's no connection, well, I listened to a good 40 seconds of SETO, S-E-A, second word T-O-W, on hold, listened to their music. There was plenty good connection, but before I can even get to the death threats of blood, so much blood everywhere, and don't step outside, and more, before I can even get to the grand jury, before I can get to the autopsy that's being kept hidden from us, I want you to meet someone very important, critical to this investigation. Her name, Janetta Brantley. Miss Brantley is the audio engineer who enhanced the 911 call, the CETO call, in the Nolan Wells case. So everybody claiming some ding-dong on YouTube did it, or somebody on Insta or TikTok did it, no. She did it. I've spoken to her. I've read her statement. I want you to judge her credibility. Credibility is normally the sole province of a jury, and tonight you serve in that function. Miss Brantley, I'm sure that you're getting all sorts of abuse, threats, and so forth. It's a cacophony that seemingly won't cease. That said, thank you for being with us tonight. Explain to me where you got the audio, how you got the audio, and what, if anything, you did to enhance the audio.
First and foremost, I basically downloaded it off of YouTube from WLOX News's YouTube site. And when I downloaded it, I ripped it off of YouTube. That's the terminology that we use when we take something off of YouTube. But when I ripped it off of YouTube
Pause.
and I pulled it in.
Pause, please. Objection. Miss Brantley, isn't it true that the audio you got was taken directly by XLO from MDMR, correct? The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay, please continue, Miss Brantley.
So when I downloaded it from YouTube, I pulled it into my DAW, which is Logic Pro X. That's my DAW of choice. And when I first listened to it, I realized that it was like a dual mono recording, which most, most phone services or operators utilize when they're recording conversations. And so it was already split between the caller, the dispatch, and the callers in the background. And so that's what made it easy for me to isolate it without having to do much to it. So that isolation, when I separated the left channel from the right channel, that just made me be able to really focus on everything that was on the call end. And what I was hearing was I honestly could not believe what I was hearing.
Miss Janetta Brantley, isn't it true this is the same audio that was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Let's listen to it one more time.
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our village pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can you all please come? We have a membership. Hey, up! Shut the up! What'd you say? It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. We're going down now. I don't know the phone number. It's either. I think it's. Try that. Everybody was on this phone. I know we have a membership, guaranteed. I don't have the tag on here. It got ripped off. What? No, we do not need that. Let me go look. Where's this? Hey, jump in and pull the plug while you're going. Take out of here. Hello. Take it out of here. Okay, what's going on? What's up?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our Doge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership. Hello! Let's go! Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our Doge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership. Hello! Let's go!
Back to Janetta Brantley joining us tonight, and she shows herself in that video showing what she is doing. What does adding EQ mean, Ms. Brantley?
Adding EQ is basically selecting a certain frequency of the actual sound and either deleting or removing a certain noise, something that's problematic to the ear, deleting that or boosting that. That's literally all EQing is.
What was your process, Janetta? Because I was sitting researching. It was early in the morning, like 5:45 a.m. several days ago, and I was researching the Nolan Wells case, and I saw the transcript as it was being played. And my husband was also up. He said, "What's wrong?" I'm like, if this is real, this changes everything. It changes everything. Because up until that point, it seemed as if Nolan's death could very well have been an accident. If this is real, it changes everything. It's seismic. What was your reaction when you heard these words, Janetta Brantley?
I think at my core, I was in disbelief. I wasn't cleaning it or enhancing it to specifically look for or identify a crime or even point the fingers at anybody. I believe I wanted it to be an accident. I think a lot of us wanted it to be an accident. So when I heard those things, when I heard, "Damn it, Bart," that name stood out to me because I hadn't even heard that name before. As I was listening to certain things that stood out to me, I was in disbelief because, again, I'm just an audio engineer. I'm not an investigator, a detective, or anything like that. So when I heard a name that I wasn't familiar with, it stood out to me, and that alone made me want to hear what was immediately said after "Damn it, Bart." And so that's why in that process where "Damn it, Bart" came in loud and clear to me, I decided to go over to the next part to hear what the rest of that statement was, which is where you saw me actually create a loop over that part, split that part, and then add a gain, which the gain is boosting the volume overall. And that's pretty much what you saw me do in that actual video. And so to hear, "Damn it, Bart, Nolan's really dead now," that I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
My reaction too, Janetta, because when I first heard it, I thought this has got to be doctored. This can't be real. Don't move. Straight out to veteran trial lawyer Franz Borghardt, a veteran trial lawyer joining us out of the Baton Rouge jurisdiction at Borghardt's law firm. Franz, take off your defense hat just one moment. I have introduced wiretaps many times at trials, which are very hard to get, by the way. And I've never had one that I believed was doctored at the time because they were taken by law enforcement. This is from a completely independent source with no dog in the fight, no skin in the game. It's from dispatch at CETO. And if this is real, this blows the case wide up. Now, you saw Janetta Brantley. You've heard her. I have no reason to disbelieve anything she's saying.
So if I'm prosecuting this, I'm worried that I need a witness in 2026 to exclude the possibility that it's either AI generated or doctored, just like you suggested. And I think that she's very credible, but I think we need to go one step further. The other concern I have, Nancy, is if the independent autopsy is showing inconclusive death results, now I really want to see the other autopsy to see, is there trauma to the body? Is there something that happened? These are the concerns I would have as a prosecutor.
Before we talk about obstructions such as allegedly lying or covering something up, you've already mentioned two distinct lines of inquiry. One is that the audio that Janetta Brantley enhanced innocently, I believe, had been already AI or doctored. Okay, let's follow that through to its logical conclusion. You just throw that out there like a stink bomb at the circle. You know what a circle meeting is, right? In the United Methodist Church, all the ladies have circle meetings. Okay. To suggest this was doctored before Janetta got it means it had to have been doctored or AI created by who? The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. No, don't just go, that doesn't work in court, Burkhartz. You can't just throw, that's like the sod defense. Some other dude did it. What dude? What are you talking about? So you're saying AI doctored by who? If it's not Janetta, then who? She got it. The same sound that was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. What? You think they doctored it?
There is nothing normal about this case. And if the
That's not what I asked you. I'm asking you to explain your premise, and you're not doing it.
I said if I were a prosecutor, I would want to be able to establish with expert testimony that what we are listening to is real. And I would want a witness, because I'm telling you, with this case, with as viral as it's been, I'm not disagreeing that it's real. I'm saying I would want to be able to bolster that very credible woman's testimony, and she is very credible. I have no doubt that what we're listening to and what she did is credible. The issue is I don't know if she can go the distance to say,
okay,
right,
got it. She cannot testify as to whether MDMR had enhanced it or doctored it before it was released. But see, the problem is, you would have to ask someone to believe a clerk or an official at the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources doctored this before they released it, to the extent that nobody could understand it until they enhanced it. That's a hell of a doctor job. Okay, so you did that. Then you got into the medical examiner findings. Okay, what was your theory on that? Very quickly.
If he's dead on the boat, how did he die? It should be conclusive. It shouldn't be inconclusive.
Hold on. Joining us right now, Joseph Scott Morgan, renowned death investigator, professor of forensics, Jacksonville State University, with a premier criminal pro department and building, author of Blood Beneath My Feet, star of a hit series, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, and it goes on. Significant, over 10,000 death scenes under his belt. Joe Scott, follow up. I'm not arguing with Burkhartz. Let's learn, if we can, from what he's saying. Jump.
Yeah, so whatever has been the causal factors here has got to marry up with what they were seeing at the scene, and perhaps the audio does fall into this. these statements. And I think that probably from a medical legal perspective, that is the coroner and the medical examiner are going to want to be able to fully appreciate what is being said here from a timeline. This is absent the police's investigation. They're going to try to rule in or rule out what they're seeing presenting on Nolan's remains when they finally did receive them at the state medical examiner's office and that examination began. And this is going to be critical and key, because the causal effects here are going to be critical. We go back to these changes that the second autopsy referred to on the back of the head. Now, the doctor was not able to, at that point in time, even though he did do a thorough, what's referred to as a layered dissection here, he could not establish the causal effects here because the injury or the insult that you see there, this presentation, is compromised by decomposition. So what did the state medical examiner see? My problem is here, Nancy, how was the body treated before or after the first autopsy and the body is transported up to DC? I have questions about this because they're talking about to the degree with which the body was decomposed. The doctor up in DC is seeing significant decomposition. We don't know what they saw in Mississippi, but I do know that you're only talking about and I'm ballparking here, please give me some grace, maybe 48 hours tops before the medical legal authorities have seen the body. So how far degraded is the body to compromise any of this? And this evidence is going to have to be borne out, not just with the physical findings that you see with the unaided eye, but also whatever's going on toxicologically.
I want you to take a careful look at this video we have obtained. Let's see it. Look how tightly everyone is packed in. There were hundreds of people out on Horn Island on July the 4th. What, nobody saw what happened to Nolan Wells? They all just left with him standing there stranded, waving his arms like Gilligan? That did not happen. Now that you're seeing this, what is an innocent explanation? I'm trying to figure that out. Joining me, and I'll circle back to you, Joe Scott, because I got a lot of questions regarding the way he could have died innocently and been left behind, and that sound being true. The sound that Janetta Brantley enhanced. Is there any innocent explanation? Is there a way, as my favorite judge often said, Luther Alverson, it is your duty to make all witnesses speak the truth and impugn perjury to no one. Is there a way that can be done? I don't know that it can. It seems to me that someone is lying. But who? Joining me now, Teslin Figaro, social justice, political commentator, host of the Teslin Figaro podcast. Ms. Figaro, thank you for being with us. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's what the family is saying. They don't believe he died by accident. That's the point. That's the reason why Nolan Wells' mom is saying, I don't believe this. I don't believe he died by accident before we had the audio. The audio simply confirms that there are additional questions that needs to be asked. It wasn't just one thing they said in the audio. They said Nolan repeatedly in the audio. They said check his chest in the audio. They said, is he dead in the audio? And also, notice this, Nancy. Did you notice that the operator also said, is anybody breathing? Who says that? What operator says who all is breathing on the boat? So is this all the audio, Nancy? Is there more audio? That's my question.
I want to look specifically, Teslin, at what was said. At one point, we think, you killed him? He's already dead. He's already dead? Is he dead? Yeah, Nolan, OMG, wake up. And as Janetta stated, then she hears a completely different name, Bart. Now, we also hear, and I'm very curious, the phrase, no. Teslin Figaro, was that a nickname of Nolan Wells?
I cannot confirm if that's a nickname of his or not. But what I do know is we heard Nolan. What I do know is we heard check his chest. What I do know is that we said, is he dead? What we do know is we heard screams. There's folks out there suggesting that perhaps they were talking to a seagull or perhaps talking to some random bird that was flying around that's called No-No. There were folks out there that suggested, well, maybe they were talking about the boat. Come on, we got to knock this off, Nancy. We heard what we heard. And so if we were to put this before a jury.
Also, we hear, damn it, Bart, No-No's really dead. Damn it, Bart, No-No's really dead. Repeating it over and over and over. According to reports, his nickname, one of them, is No-No. Back to Tesla and Figaro. What is Nolan's mother's theory about what happened in light of these tapes?
Before we even had the tapes, her theory is, I told my son, I've raised my son just like I've raised my 19-year-old the same way, Nancy, like I'm sure you raise your children. Come back with the people you went with. Her theory has always been that he is a fantastic swimmer, that he is an athlete. Her theory has always been that he did not drown. Her theory has always been that there's something wrong with this picture. Her theory has always been that the fact that, he left his phone and left his keys. Her theory has also always been that he did not just go off with some random stranger and say, guys, don't worry about it, just leave me on an island. Her theory is the same thing before this audio. This audio only confirms what this mother already knew.
A search involving the Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and volunteer groups, including the United Cajun Navy, launched the following morning. On July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found Nolan's body in the water off the island's northwestern tip. He was identified through dental records, not visual identification. That detail matters, and we'll come back to it. The Jackson County coroner confirmed there were no immediately obvious signs of physical trauma. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office stated publicly, in the earliest days of this case, that there was no information at that time suggesting a crime had occurred. That is a confirmed skeleton of what happened. Everything else, the arguments, the interviews, the phone, the Snapchat account, the interrogator's viral breakdown of one friend's timeline, hangs off that skeleton. And it's that last piece, one specific interview, that we need to slow down on, because something happened inside it that most people watching completely miss the first time through. Before we move into the interview itself, it's worth sitting inside that 90-minute window one more time, slowly, because almost every unresolved question in this entire case lives inside those 90 minutes between 3 o'clock, when Nolan was reportedly last seen by multiple people in the friend group, and 4:31. When the GPS data confirms a boat actually left the island. 90 minutes is not a short window. On a crowded holiday beach with roughly 200 people moving in and out of each other's company, 90 minutes is enough time for dozens of small interactions, conversations, and movements that nobody would think to specifically remember unless something afterward made those minutes suddenly retroactively important. That's part of why reconstructing this window has been so difficult for investigators. And it's also part of why any single account claiming precise, confident detail about that window deserves a closer look, not less scrutiny. Because genuine memory of an unremarkable 90 minutes on a chaotic beach usually comes back fuzzy, not sharp. According to Friend Group's account, somewhere in that window, the bilge pump failure occurred, forcing an early, urgent departure. According to that same account, Nolan made the decision, communicated to his friends, to remain behind. According to Katie's family's account, Nolan told her something that led her to believe the opposite, that he intended to return to the original boat. Both of those claims cannot be fully accurate at the same time, and both were formed by definition somewhere inside those same 90 minutes. This is the window Warren was describing when he gave his interview to Brandon Tatum. It's worth remembering that as we move into the next section, because everything about that interview's internal contradiction traces back to how Warren chose to describe his own position and Nolan's inside this exact stretch of time. Quick pause before we get into the interview itself, because I want to know something from you. Everything you just heard, the bilge pump, the 4:31 departure, the 11 o'clock call to the Coast Guard. That's all documented, agency-confirmed information. If you were actually tracking that timeline in your head, as I laid it out, drop the word recall down in the comments right now. I'm asking for a reason. In about 4 minutes. That word is going to matter, because the entire mistake we're about to walk through hinges on exactly how reliable a person's recall is under stress. And I want to see how many of you were building your own timeline before I even got to the interview. Type recall if you were tracking it. Let's keep going. In the days after Nolan's body was found, 3 friends who had been on the island with him agreed to a sit-down interview. It was conducted by Brandon Tatum, a media personality with a large platform, not a law enforcement officer, not a court-appointed investigator, a media interviewer. That distinction is going to matter in about 2 minutes. One of the 3 friends in that interview is a young man we'll refer by the first name that's already been made public through prior reporting and his own mother's public statements. Warren. Warren is not charged with any crime. Warren is not, as of this recording, named by any law enforcement agency as a suspect. His mother, a sitting judge in the area, has spoken publicly and said Warren has cooperated fully with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. We are naming him because his own account, given voluntarily and publicly, is the subject of intense public scrutiny, and because avoiding his name while dissecting his exact words would be its own kind of dishonesty. But we want to be extremely clear before we go one sentence further. Nothing in this section is an accusation. It is a factual breakdown of an inconsistency in a public statement, and we are going to walk through both the concerning explanation and the innocent one, because a fair investigation and a fair video has to hold both possibilities at once. Here's what Warren says in his own words early in that interview. Asked directly where Nolan was as the group prepared to leave the island, Warren responds, "The last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. Sit with that phrasing for a second, because it's precise. Not sometime in the afternoon. Not a while before we left. 3 o'clock, a specific hour, stated with confidence. A few minutes later in that same interview, describing the moment the group actually departed the island, Warren says something that directly contradicts what he just told the interviewer. Describing the 4:30 departure, he says Nolan was sitting by the boat. He describes his friend calling out for Nolan to get on. He describes a specific physical location for Nolan's body in space. At 4:30, 90 minutes after he had just said the last time he laid eyes on Nolan at all was 3 o'clock. Those 2 statements cannot both be literally true. If the last time you saw someone was 3 o'clock, you cannot also describe in specific physical detail where that same person was sitting at 4:30. One of 2 things happened inside that interview room. Either Warren misspoke, conflating 2 separate moments the way people commonly do when they're recounting a chaotic, emotional day under the pressure of a camera and a stranger's questions. Or the timeline he gave contains a gap he wasn't prepared to account for cleanly, and the inconsistency is the visible seam where that gap shows through. We are not going to tell you which one it is. Nobody watching this video is qualified to make that determination from a single recorded interview, and neither is a YouTube reaction channel, and neither, frankly, is Brandon Tatum, who, and this is worth saying directly, did not follow up on the discrepancy in the moment. He did not ask Warren to reconcile 3 o'clock with sitting by the boat at 4:30. He moved on. That a real gap in that interview, regardless of what caused Warren's inconsistency in the first place. This is exactly the kind of detail that gets buried the moment a story moves fast, and it's exactly why we built this channel the way we did, going back through footage frame by frame instead of just repeating whatever headline moved fastest that day. If that kind of digging is worth something to you, this is the moment to actually hit that subscribe button instead of just letting the video autoplay into the next one. We've noticed a real gap between how many people watch these breakdowns and how many people are actually part of this channel long term. And honestly, we'd rather have a smaller audience that sticks around for the real analysis than a big one that only shows up for the algorithm. If that's you, make it official. Now let's talk about why an inconsistency like this matters, and why it also might mean almost nothing at all. Let's take the responsible path here and actually explain both sides of this, because a viral clip stripped of context is not the same thing as an honest analysis. The case for why this matters, memory under normal circumstances, is already unreliable when it comes to exact clock times. Most people cannot tell you, hours after the fact, the precise minute they last saw a friend at a crowded event, especially when nobody was checking a watch. Investigators and forensic psychologists who study eyewitness recall consistently find that people reconstruct timelines after the fact, filling gaps with what feels plausible rather than what was actually observed in the moment. That's not lying. That's how human memory works under stress, especially the stress of losing a friend and then being placed in front of the camera to talk about it publicly for the first time. So here's the innocent explanation, stated as fairly as we can state it. Warren may have compressed two separate memories, his last real one-on-one interaction with Nolan around 3 o'clock, and a general awareness, not a direct visual memory, of Nolan's approximate location as the group prepared to leave, into a single narrated moment that sounds more precise and more visually specific than it actually was. People do this constantly when recounting emotional days. It is not evidence of concealment. It is a known, documented feature of human recall. Here's the more concerning read, and we owe it to you to state this honestly, too. If Warren did have direct visual contact with Nolan at 4:30, specific enough to describe his exact position near the boat, then the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock was not accurate, and the interview never circled back to correct or explain that. In an investigation where the family has already raised concerns about missing content on Nolan's phone, a Coast Guard call placed hours after his friends reportedly last saw him, an autopsy that has taken weeks to complete, a witness statement that doesn't line up with itself is the kind of detail that deserves a direct follow-up question from investigators, not just from an online reaction channel. What we can tell you with confidence, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter's office has stated that formal, separate witness interviews are part of the active investigation, and that detail matters here specifically. Investigators interview witnesses individually rather than in groups precisely because shared, repeated retellings, including retellings given publicly on camera to a media personality before law enforcement has finished its own separate interviews, can shape and reshape memory even without anyone intending to deceive. If Warren's account to investigators, given separately and under different conditions, matches what he told Tatum, that's meaningful. If it doesn't, that's meaningful in a different direction. As of this recording, we do not know which of those has happened because law enforcement has not released that information publicly, and we are not going to pretend otherwise. There's a broader pattern worth naming here, too, because it isn't unique to Warren or to this case. Research into eyewitness memory consistently shows that the act of publicly retelling an emotional event, especially multiple times, to multiple audiences, in the days immediately following it, tends to smooth out a timeline's rough edges rather than preserve them accurately. People unconsciously fill gaps with what feels narratively coherent, not necessarily with what they actually perceived in the moment. That's a well-documented phenomenon in forensic psychology, and it cuts in both directions here. It means Warren's contradiction could easily be an artifact of exactly that process, a genuinely honest person's memory smoothing itself into a cleaner story than the messier, more uncertain reality of that afternoon actually was. It also means that the version of events the friend group has now told publicly several times to several outlets in a fairly consistent shape deserves to be checked against whatever they told investigators closer to the actual event, before repeated retelling had the chance to do that same smoothing work on the group's collective account. This is precisely why formal individual recorded law enforcement interviews exist as a distinct step separate from media appearances, family statements, and reaction videos, including this one. They're not just a formality. They're a deliberate check against the very human tendency this section has just described. There's one more layer to this specific interview worth addressing directly, because it explains why this contradiction went unexamined in the moment it was actually spoken, and it has nothing to do with Warren. Brandon Tatum is a media personality with a large, established platform, not a trained investigative interviewer, and not a law enforcement officer conducting a formal interrogation. That distinction matters structurally, independent of anyone's opinion of him personally. A formal law enforcement interview is built around a specific discipline. When a subject's own timeline contradicts itself, a trained interviewer is taught to stop, circle back, and ask the subject to reconcile the two statements before moving forward, precisely because unresolved contradictions are where the most important information in an interview often lives. That did not happen here. When Warren moved from the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock to a specific, detailed description of Nolan's location at 4:30, the interview simply continued forward without pausing to ask the obvious follow-up question. Which one was it? That's not necessarily a criticism of intent. It may simply reflect the difference between a sympathetic, supportive conversation designed to give a grieving friend space to talk and a formal investigative interview designed specifically to stress test a timeline. Those are different kinds of conversations with different goals. And it's fair to say this interview was clearly closer to the first kind than the second. But it's worth naming plainly, because it's the actual structural reason this contradiction slipped past unchallenged in real time and only became widely discussed after other people, reviewing the footage afterward with a different kind of scrutiny, caught what the original conversation let pass. This is also, honestly, part of why we built this section of the video the way we did. Our job here isn't to conduct the interview Warren should eventually give to trained investigators in a formal, separate setting. It's to point out clearly and without exaggeration that a real, documented gap exists in the public record, one that deserves a real follow-up from people with the authority and training to actually resolve it, rather than being left to circulate online as either a viral gotcha clip or an inconvenient detail nobody mentions again. The Warren interview inconsistency doesn't exist in isolation. It sits directly next to a second, separate contradiction involving the young woman Nolan reportedly spent his final afternoon with. According to a public statement from her sister, Gracie McCormick, posted on behalf of the family, Katie's account of that afternoon is this. Nolan's friends had been pressuring him to wrap up his conversation with her so he could return with them. Based on that conversation, Katie assumed Nolan was heading back toward the boat he'd originally arrived in. She made it home safely that day on a different boat entirely, picked up by other family members. According to that same family statement, Katie assumed the friends calling Nolan over wouldn't leave without him. Compare that to the friend's account, delivered by Warren and others, that Nolan told him he wanted to stay behind and continue talking with Katie, and chose to remain on the island. Those two versions point in opposite directions. In Katie's family's account, Nolan believed he was returning to the boat. In the friend's account, Nolan chose to stay. Somewhere between those two versions sits the actual final conversation Nolan Wells ever had, and two separate people who were both physically present for it still weeks later describe it in ways that don't match. That's the detail that should trouble anyone following this case closely, regardless of which explanation you find more believable for Warren's 3 o'clock and 4:30 inconsistency. It is not one shaky memory. It is two separate accounts, from two separate people, both describing the same short conversation, both pointing in different directions about which direction Nolan believed he was walking. It's worth being fair to Katie here as well, since she has not, as of this recording, given a direct on-camera, on-record interview of her own. Everything attributed to her account has come through her sister's public statement, which means we are one layer removed from Katie's actual words, tone, and certainty. That family statement also explicitly noted that Katie assumed the friends calling Nolan over that afternoon wouldn't have left without him, and that she made it home safely on a separate boat entirely, meaning she did not personally witness whatever happened after that final conversation concluded. Her account, secondhand as it currently is, describes what Nolan told her he believed he was about to do, not what actually happened to him afterward. That distinction matters, and it's part of why we've been careful throughout this video to describe her account as coming to her family rather than presenting it with the same weight as a direct, sworn, on-record statement. This is exactly the kind of moment where I want to know if you're actually following the thread here, because it matters for what comes next in this video. We just laid out two separate, independent contradictions. Warren's 3 o'clock versus 4:30 account, and Katie's family's version of that final conversation versus the friend group's version. Two separate people, two separate stories that don't match. If you caught that these are two different contradictions and not the same one repeated, drop the word ledger in the comments right now, because in a few minutes we're going to walk through the full ledger of what's confirmed, what's disputed, and what's still completely unknown in this case. And I want to see how many of you are ready for that breakdown. Type ledger if you're tracking both threads. We cannot talk honestly about this case without addressing two pieces of viral evidence that spread to hundreds of thousands of people and turn out to be false. Because separating real evidence from manufactured evidence is exactly the discipline this channel exists to provide. The first is a photo. In the days after Nolan's death, a photo surfaced online showing Nolan in a pool, surrounded by a group of people, posted alongside a claim that he had actually returned from Horn Island alive, attended a party, been assaulted, and had his body returned to the water afterward. That claim spread to hundreds of thousands of viewers within hours. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the family, reposted the image with a caption stating clearly that he did not know whether the underlying claims were fact or rumor, and that his team was following all leads. Most people online skipped past that caveat entirely and treated the photo as confirmed proof. Rolling Stone investigated the photo's actual metadata, corroborated independently through a second source, and determined the image was taken on June 27th, 8 days before the 4th of July, at a separate party in Pass Christian, Mississippi. Trayston Shepard, a close friend of Nolan's who was not even present at that particular party, identified the people in the photo, including Nolan, and confirmed the date. This claim is now debunked. It should not circulate as evidence of anything, because it isn't evidence of anything. We're including it here specifically, so anyone who saw that photo circulating understands clearly. It was taken more than a week before Nolan ever stepped onto that boat. The second piece of viral misinformation is a video. Shortly after Nolan's death, a clip began circulating showing what appeared to be an argument on a boat, with a voice that sounded like it was demanding a phone back, saying, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" Ben Crump referenced this clip publicly on Good Morning America, saying he believed the voice belonged to Nolan. That claim also spread rapidly and became one of the emotional centerpieces of early coverage of this case. Trayston Shepard came forward directly to ABC News and stated plainly that the voice on that recording is his own, not Nolan's, and that he'd been in a separate altercation with someone else entirely that day, unrelated to Nolan. Crump has since publicly acknowledged the conflicting accounts and said his team is working with audio experts to determine definitively whose voice is actual on that recording, and has committed to being more careful going forward about labeling claims as what a witness told us rather than present it as confirmed fact. We are telling you about both of these debunked claims for a specific reason. It would be easy, and frankly it would probably get more views, to lean into every piece of viral content that makes this case feel more dramatic. That is not what this channel does. When a claim is debunked, we report that it's debunked clearly and without hedging, because letting false information keep circulating unchallenged does real harm to real people, including people who have not been charged with anything and do not deserve to have fabricated video evidence attached to their names. Now let's talk about the piece of physical evidence that may end up matching more than any interview clip. Nolan's phone. Here's what's confirmed. When Nolan was reported missing, his phone was not with him. It had remained with a group of friends who left the island. Christine Wansley has stated that the family used the Life 360 tracking app to locate the device and recover it from one of the friends' homes. When she and her sister went through it, specifically checking Snapchat, an app Nolan reportedly used constantly, they found no saved photos or videos from July 4th, despite checking before the standard 24-hour expiration window on that content. Christine has publicly stated this struck her as unusual, because by every account from people who knew him, Nolan documented gatherings constantly. That allegation that content may have been deleted or is otherwise unaccounted for has not been independently verified through forensic examination as of this recording. It is a claim from a family based on their own review of the device, not a confirmed forensic finding. What has happened since is a genuinely significant procedural development. Following a meeting between the family, their legal team, and Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, both sides agreed to a mutual, simultaneous inspection of the phone. Both the family's forensic experts and the state's investigators will examine the device's data at the same time, seeing the same information pulled the same way. Attorney Eric Hertz, working with former law enforcement experts, is helping oversee that process on the family side. This matters for a reason that goes beyond this one case. When two separate parties independently extract data from the same device, disputes over what was found, what was missing, or what was altered tend to multiply. A joint, simultaneous inspection closes that gap before it opens. It's a genuinely unusual level of transparency for an active investigation, and legal analysts covering this case have described it as highly unusual outside of cases already headed towards serious charges. There's also a competing, more mundane explanation for the missing Snapchat content worth stating fairly, because we owe you the innocent read here too, the same way we did with Warren's interview. One friend of Nolan's has told ABC News that leaving phones behind on the boat's dashboard while swimming and socializing on the island was completely normal practice within the friend group, done specifically to protect the devices from salt water, and that Nolan's phone was one of roughly 15 phones left in that spot that day. Snapchat content of the kind Christine was looking for can also expire or fail to sync properly depending on connectivity. And cell service on a remote barrier island 10 miles offshore is notoriously unreliable. It's entirely possible that Gap has a boring, technical explanation rather than a deliberate one. But attorney Tyler Bailey, a civil rights and criminal defense attorney who has spoken publicly about this case, has pointed out the detail that keeps this question open rather than settled. Even accepting that phones were commonly left on the boat, Nolan had reportedly just spent the afternoon with someone he was interested in getting to know better. Most 18-year-olds in that exact situation would want a way to stay in contact with that person afterward, which makes leaving the phone behind, while not impossible, at least somewhat inconsistent with what you'd expect from someone planning to see or talk to Katie again. That's not proof of anything. It's simply one more small detail that doesn't cleanly resolve in either direction, sitting alongside all the others. If you're the kind of person who actually wants the procedural details like that phone inspection agreement explained clearly instead of just being told to be outraged about it, that's precisely the gap we're trying to fill with this channel, and it only works if enough of you decide to stick around for it. Right now, our subscriber count is genuinely lagging behind how many of you are actually watching these full breakdowns, and every single one of you who taps that button makes it more likely we can keep dedicating this much time to one case instead of chasing whatever's trending that week. So if this has been useful so far, go ahead and join us properly. It matters more than you'd think for a channel this size. Now, let's get into what the medical evidence can and cannot tell us. There are two separate autopsies underway in this case, and understanding why matters. The state of Mississippi conducted an initial autopsy through the state medical examiner's office shortly after Nolan's identification. Officials have stated that the full findings, including a completed toxicology report, are still pending. Toxicology analysis routinely takes weeks, sometimes longer, regardless of how much public attention a case receives, and state labs generally do not fast-track cases based on media coverage. As of this recording, no official cause or manner of death has been publicly released by the state. Separately, at the family's request, Nolan's body was transported to Washington, D.C. for an independent autopsy conducted by a pathologist with no ties to Mississippi. That examination was funded in part by Colin Kaepernick, and the funeral costs were covered by Tyler Perry, both facts confirmed directly by the family's legal team. The independent autopsy results were originally expected within roughly a week of that announcement. They have been delayed, according to Ben Crump, due to logistical issues transporting Nolan's body, including flight cancellations. As of this recording, those results have also not been publicly released. We want to be direct about something here, because it's important for understanding why this case has taken the shape it has. Investigators can typically determine relatively quickly whether a body shows signs of drowning versus other causes of death through basic examination. Determining exactly how and why someone entered the water, whether there was any struggle, any external factor, or any substance involved, requires the slower toxicology and forensic work that is still pending in both examinations until both of those reports are public. Any claim you see online about a confirmed cause of death from any source on any side of this case is not yet supported by released, verifiable findings. We want to spend a moment explaining, in general terms, how forensic pathology actually approaches a case like this one, because a lot of the speculation circulating online treats determining a drowning as either instant and obvious or as something being deliberately dragged out, and neither of those is accurate. In general, forensic pathologists examining a body recovered from water are looking for several categories of evidence simultaneously. First, whether there's fluid in the lungs and airways consistent with drowning, which can indicate the person was breathing at the point they entered the water. Second, whether there's any evidence of trauma, internal or external, that occurred before, during, or after entry into the water, which requires careful examination because time in water can itself cause injuries and changes to the body that have nothing to do with the actual cause of death. Third, toxicology, which requires laboratory analysis of blood and tissue samples that simply cannot be rushed regardless of public interest in the case, because the chemical processes involved in accurately detecting and quantifying substances take real time in a lab, not hours. General claims circulating in some online commentary, suggesting that determining drowning is as simple as checking for water in the lungs and nothing more, oversimplify a process that forensic pathologists describe as considerably more layered, particularly in cases where a body has been in water for an extended period before recovery, where decomposition and environmental factors can complicate straightforward conclusions. That's part of why both the state examiner and the family's independent pathologist are taking real, documented time rather than releasing preliminary conclusions, and it's part of why any online claim asserting a specific, detailed cause of death right now, before either report has been released, should be treated with real skepticism regardless of how confidently it's stated. What we can tell you is this: the fact that two separate, independent examinations are being conducted, one by the state and one commissioned by the family, and performed outside Mississippi, is itself a meaningful safeguard. If the two examinations reach substantially different conclusions once both are released, that divergence will be a significant newsworthy development in its own right. If they align, that alignment will carry real weight precisely because the two examinations were conducted independently of each other by different pathologists under different institutional pressures. Following the family's meeting with District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath, Ben Crump announced that the case will be turned over to a grand jury once the Jackson County Sheriff's Office completes its investigation. This is a real confirmed development, and it's also one that has been widely misunderstood online. So let's be precise about what it actually means. A grand jury referral is not the same thing as criminal charges. It means that once investigators finish gathering evidence, a panel of citizens will review that evidence and determine whether probable cause exists to support an indictment. According to legal analysts who covered this case, a grand jury referral for an unnatural or suspicious death is described by the district attorney's office as standard procedure, not an announcement that charges are imminent. McElrath's office has stated directly that authorities have not, at this stage, indicated this is being treated as a criminal investigation into a specific person. What could a grand jury actually be looking at if it does move forward with a full evidentiary presentation? Legal analysts we reviewed on this case have pointed out that a grand jury doesn't need to be limited to homicide-related charges. It could examine anything from potential obstruction to tampering with evidence to questions about how information was shared or withheld during the investigation, alongside any evidence bearing on how Nolan actually died. None of that means any of those things happened. It means those are the categories of charges a grand jury proceeding is structurally capable of considering, depending entirely on what evidence is actually presented to it. We also want to note something procedural that's easy to miss. Under Mississippi law, a victim's family is entitled to receive an incident report within 72 hours of a death. As of the family's meeting with the district attorney, more than a week past that legal window, Christine and Elmore Wansley still had not received that report. That a documented on-record fact, stated by the family's attorneys at a public press conference, not a rumor. One more confirmed detail deserves its own section, because the shift in it has been significant, and it's easy to miss if you're only catching individual clips rather than following the case week to week. In the earliest days after Nolan's body was recovered, Sheriff John Ledbetter's office stated plainly that there was no information at that time suggesting a crime had occurred. That specific phrasing, repeated across multiple early news reports, functioned for a lot of people online as the moment this case felt like it was being waved through as a simple accident before the family had even finished processing the loss. In the weeks since, Ledbetter's public language has changed noticeably. He has since confirmed that his department is conducting formal, individual witness interviews, that his office has been in direct contact with the FBI, and that tips from the public have moved the investigation forward in real, meaningful ways. This investigation is active, he stated. It's ongoing. He's also acknowledged that the department has received valuable information from the public that it did not have in the earliest days of the case. We want to be careful about how we characterize that shift, because it would be easy to overstate it. Ledbetter has not walked back the original statement or announced a new conclusion. He has not said a crime is now suspected. What he has done is describe a case that has clearly grown in scope and complexity since those first few days, requiring more resources, more coordination, and more caution than the department's earliest public comments suggested. Whether that reflects new evidence pointing towards something more serious, or simply reflects normal investigative process catching up to a case that received far more national attention than a typical drowning investigation ever would, is not something we can determine from the outside. But the shift itself is real, documented, and worth understanding in its own right, separate from any single interview clip. Sheriff John Ledbetter has confirmed that his department has been in contact with the FBI throughout this investigation, and that federal digital forensics resources have assisted in examining phone data, audio, and video connected to the case. This is worth being precise about, because it has been overstated in some coverage online. Horn Island sits within the Gulf Islands National Seashore, federal land, which is part of why federal involvement exists at all in a case like this. Sheriff Ledbetter has not stated that the FBI has taken over the investigation, and nothing in his public statements suggests Jackson County has handed the case to federal authorities. What federal involvement does provide, confirmed to the sheriff's own statements, is access to forensic tools for recovering deleted data, enhancing audio and video, and cross-referencing digital evidence against the roughly 60 witness interviews local investigators have already conducted. That is meaningfully different from a federal takeover, and it's important not to overstate it in either direction. We mentioned earlier that Nolan's best friend, Javon Williams, gave an on-record account to two separate outlets describing Nolan as someone who, throughout their entire friendship, never once left a group he'd arrived with. That claim deserves its own moment here, because it's a different category of evidence than anything else in this case. Warren's account and Katie's family's account are both, at their core, descriptions of a single afternoon, filtered through memory, emotion, and the pressure of retelling a story publicly. Williams's account is different. It's a description of a long-term behavioral pattern, offered independently, on the record, under his own name, to two separate news organizations, without contradicting himself between the two tellings. "I've never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave," Williams told CNN. "He's always been a guy where if he rode with you, he's going to come back with you. That's always how he's been every single time." That statement doesn't prove anything happened to Nolan against his will. People break lifelong patterns for all kinds of ordinary reasons, and meeting someone new on a beach is exactly the kind of reason that plausibly explains a one-time exception. But it does mean the friend group's account isn't just being weighed against Katie's family's account. It's also being weighed against a description of Nolan's own established character, offered by the person who arguably knew him best outside his immediate family. That a third data point pulling against a version of events where Nolan simply, casually chose to break a rule his own parents say he'd never broken before. Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley have both stated publicly, separately, that they raised Nolan with one explicit rule about situations exactly like this one. If you go with a group, you stay with a group. Elmore has said plainly that he doesn't understand why his son would have deviated from that on the one day it mattered most. That's not proof of anything either, but 3 separate sources, Nolan's best friend and both of his parents, independently describing the same lifelong pattern, is a kind of convergence that a serious investigation has to take seriously, even while it also takes seriously the much simpler, much more common explanation that an 18-year-old met someone he liked and, for once, made a different choice than usual. There's one more piece of confirmed GPS data worth walking through carefully, because it raises a question that hasn't been fully answered publicly. According to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources data obtained by CBS News, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 and didn't return to its original dock until well over an hour later, despite the direct distance involved typically being coverable in a fraction of that time, even accounting for a boat already dealing with mechanical trouble. From there, the same GPS data shows the boat traveling into Fort Bayou before returning to the dock, and later that evening traveling to a boat launch before apparently being towed overland to boat owner's residence in Biloxi. None of that, on its own, is evidence of wrongdoing. Boats with mechanical problems travel slower. Groups make stops. People take time to process a chaotic afternoon before heading home. But it is a documented, confirmed gap in the timeline, agency-sourced, and not disputed by either side. And it sits inside the same broader window where the friend group's account and Katie's family's account already don't line up. We're including it here not because it proves anything by itself, but because a full, honest accounting of this case means giving you every piece investigators are actually working with, not just the ones that make for the most dramatic 30-second clip. We'd be leaving out something significant if we didn't address why this case became a national story as quickly as it did, because that context matters, and it deserves to be handled carefully rather than either amplified for outrage or avoided entirely out of discomfort. Nolan was, by multiple accounts, invisible in circulating photos and video from that day, one of very few black attendees among a much larger group on Horn Island that afternoon. Reverend Al Sharpton, appearing alongside the family and attorney Ben Crump, has stated publicly that the family is not centering race as the explanation for what happened, but is also not discounting it as a factor worth examining, particularly given documented historical patterns of uneven investigative urgency in cases involving black victims in the South. That is a measured, specific position, not an accusation against any named individual, and it deserves to be represented accurately rather than flattened into a simpler, more inflammatory claim in either direction. It's also true, and worth stating plainly, that discussion of this case has at times split sharply along racial and political lines online, with some commentators treating any scrutiny of the friend group as inherently unfounded, and others treating the mere composition of that friend group as itself suspicious. Both of those instincts skip past the actual, specific, documented inconsistencies this video is focused on. A contradiction inside a witness's own recorded statement is either present or it isn't, regardless of who is making that observation or what they believe about broader patterns and how cases like this one get investigated. We try to keep this video anchored to that distinction throughout, and we think that's the only responsible way to cover a case that has become this politically and emotionally charged as quickly. Attorney Ben Crump has stated, in the family's own words relayed through him, that their lived experience informs why they push as hard as they have for transparency, independent verification, and an autopsy conducted outside the state. That context explains the family's approach without requiring anyone watching this video to accept a specific theory about what happened to Nolan. Those are two separate things, and we think it's possible and necessary to hold both. Okay, before we move into the last major section of this video, I want to check something with you directly, because this is a part people get wrong constantly in the comments on every single video about this case. We just walked through the difference between a grand jury referral and actual criminal charges, and the difference between the FBI assisting with digital forensics versus the FBI taking over an investigation. Those distinctions matter enormously, and they get flattened into the FBI is involved. So someone's about to be arrested almost every single time this case gets discussed online. If you actually caught both of those distinctions clearly, drop the word accurate in the comments right now. I want this video's comment section to actually reflect people who understood the nuance instead of people who skimmed the headline. Type accurate if you're with me. Let's finish this out. We promised earlier we lay out the complete ledger of where this case actually stands, separated cleanly by category. So let's do exactly that. Confirm documented facts. Nolan Wells was 18 years old and traveled to Horn Island on July 4th with a group of friends. GPS data confirms the boat departed the mainland at 9:56 that morning and Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon. Dispatch audio confirms a distress call regarding a failing bilge pump was placed that afternoon. A Coast Guard call was placed around 11 p.m. that night by one of Nolan's friends. Christine Wansley reported her son missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office that same night. A National Park Service ranger recovered Nolan's body on July 6th. Identification was made through dental records. The Jackson County coroner has stated there were no immediately obvious signs of physical trauma. Both a state autopsy and an independent autopsy are pending final results, including toxicology. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has confirmed the case will be presented to a grand jury once the sheriff's investigation concludes. A mutual, simultaneous inspection of Nolan's phone has been agreed to by both the family's team and law enforcement. Disputed accounts, meaning multiple named or identified sources, actively disagree. Whether Nolan intended to return to the original boat, as suggested in Katie's family's public statement, or chose to remain on the island, as stated by the friend group, including Warren, whether the voice in the viral confrontation video belonged to Nolan or, as Trayston Shepard has stated on the record to two outlets, to himself. The internal consistency of Warren's own account, specifically the contradiction between his stated last visual contact with Nolan at 3 o'clock and his later, more specific description of Nolan's location at 4:30. Unresolved and still unknown, meaning no reliable public information exists either way. The official cause and manner of Nolan's death, pending both toxicology reports. Whether any content was deliberately deleted from Nolan's phone, pending the joint forensic inspection. Whether the grand jury will ultimately hear evidence suggesting any criminal conduct occurred, or whether this concludes as a documented, tragic accidental drowning. Whether Warren's timeline inconsistency reflects an honest memory error under emotional stress or something investigators will need to press him further on in a formal, separate interview setting, which, as of this recording, we do not have public confirmation has yet happened in the way it should. That is the complete, honest state of this case as of this recording. Anyone online telling you with total certainty that they already know exactly what happened to Nolan Wells, in either direction, is telling you more than the actual evidence currently supports. If you want to follow this case responsibly rather than just reacting to whatever clip goes viral next, here's what actually matters to watch for in the coming weeks, in order how much they'll likely reshape the public understanding of what happened to Nolan. The state toxicology report and the independent autopsy findings, whenever both are finally released, will matter more than any single interview clip, because they are the closest thing this case has to objective, physical evidence about what actually happened to Nolan's body. Watch specifically for whether the two examinations agree or diverge, and watch for how each source frames the release, since both the state and the family's legal team have strong incentives to characterize ambiguous findings in the way most favorable to their existing position. The outcome of the joint, simultaneous phone inspection matters nearly as much, because it will either confirm or dispel the family's concern about missing Snapchat content, using a forensic process both sides have already agreed to trust. If that inspection turns up evidence of deliberate deletion, that becomes a significant new piece of the investigation. If it turns up a mundane technical explanation, such as content simply expiring outside a window nobody realized applied, that matters too, and deserves to be reported with the same weight as a more dramatic finding would receive. Watch for whether Warren and the other friends who were on that boat sit down for a formal, separate interview with Jackson County investigators, distinct from the media interview this video has focused on. If Warren's account of law enforcement resolves the 3 o'clock, 4:30 contradiction cleanly, that matters. If it doesn't, or if he declines to clarify it, that matters differently. and either outcome should be reported accurately rather than assumed in advance. And watch for whether the grand jury is actually convened, what it's asked to consider, and what it ultimately decides. Grand jury proceedings are legally secretive by design, meaning we may not get granular detail about what was presented, but whether an indictment results against anyone for anything will be about as close to a definitive answer as this case is likely to produce in the near term. One last thing before we move to close this out, because it's relevant to every single person watching this video right now, not just this specific case. This story has become a genuine flashpoint for exactly the kind of misinformation we walked through earlier. A photo taken more than a week before anyone even boarded that boat, a voice misattributed to a dying teenager, and fabricated AI-generated footage of a grieving mother. Every one of those pieces of false content did real, measurable harm before it was corrected, and every one of them spread specifically because people shared first and verified later. We'd ask you, genuinely, to hold a different standard going forward on this case and on every case this channel covers. If a claim about Nolan Wells' death is circulating without a named, checkable source attached to it, treat it as unverified until it's won, regardless of how emotionally satisfying it feels to believe. That's not a call for detachment or coldness about what happened to him. It's the opposite. Getting this right, for Nolan and for his family, requires exactly that kind of discipline, especially from an audience this large and this invested. Before we close this video, we want to state something directly and clearly. Every private individual named in this video, including Warren, Katie, and Trayston Shepard, has not been charged with any crime connected to Nolan Wells' death. Nothing in this video should be interpreted as an accusation of wrongdoing against any of them. Discrepancies in a public statement, given voluntarily to a media interviewer under emotional and public pressure, are not evidence of crime. And we have deliberately presented both the innocent and the concerning explanations for those discrepancies because a fair accounting of this case requires holding both possibilities honestly, not choosing the one that generates more outrage. If you take one thing from this video and repeat it to someone else, we'd ask that it be that distinction, not a headline stripped of it. So let's return to where we started, because we owe you a direct answer to the question this video's title actually asks. What was a critical mistake, and why did everyone miss it? The mistake wasn't a confession. It wasn't proof of anything. The mistake was structural, and it belonged as much to the interview itself as to the person being interviewed. Warren gave two statements minutes apart that cannot both be literally accurate, and the interviewer conducting that conversation did not stop to reconcile them. That's the actual story here. Not that a friend got caught. In the dramatic language, a lot of reaction content around this case is used, but that an interview conducted specifically to clear a group's name in the court of public opinion contained an unresolved contradiction that a real investigative interview, conducted by trained law enforcement, would not have let slide past without a follow-up question. That distinction is why this detail deserves attention, and also why it deserves restraint. It is a legitimate, documented reason for investigators to ask Warren directly, in a formal setting, to reconcile the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock, with detailed description of Nolan's location at 4:30. It is not, on its own, proof that Warren is concealing anything, and it is especially not proof that anyone caused Nolan's death. Those are two very different claims, and this case, and this young man's life going forward, deserve a difference to be respected. We'd be doing this case a disservice if we ended on procedure and left out what all of this has actually cost the people living through it in real time. Trayston Shepard, the friend who came forward publicly to correct the record on the viral video, has stated that he and others in the friend group have received death threats since doing so. Think about what that means. He took a real personal risk, correcting misinformation that was actively spreading about his own voice being mistaken for his dying friends, and the result was threats against his safety, not gratitude for correction. Christine and Elmore Wansley have described the last several weeks as unbearable in a way grief alone doesn't fully capture, compounded by fabricated AI-generated videos of Christine that have circulated online, targeting her while she was simultaneously planning her son's funeral. That is a genuinely cruel thing happening to a grieving mother, and it has nothing to do with seeking the truth about what happened to Nolan. On July 20th, the family held a homegoing celebration for Nolan at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, followed by a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Christine has said publicly that she wanted it to feel less like a funeral and more like the kind of gathering Nolan himself would have wanted, one with music and community rather than silence. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated at the family's request. That's who all of this actually surrounds. Not a viral clip, not a comment section argument about who's lying, an 18-year-old who is gone, and two parents trying to bury their son while the rest of the internet argues about a timestamp. It's also worth remembering, before this case fully collapses into an argument about a single interview clip, just how many people who never met Nolan Wells showed up for him anyway. The search that launched the morning after Christine reported him missing involved the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and volunteer groups, including the United Cajun Navy, a network of private boat owners who mobilize for search efforts entirely on their own time. Local businesses, churches, and complete strangers organized supply drops, shared flyers, and combed shoreline for 2 days straight in July heat, because a mother said her son was missing and a community decided that was reason enough to drop everything. That's easy to lose sight of in a video like this one, which by necessity spends most of its runtime on contradiction and procedure. But it's part of the record too, and it says something honest about how this case has been received far beyond the arguments happening in comment sections. A lot of people who will never appear in a single headline gave up their 4th of July weekend to look for a stranger's son, and kept looking after most people would have gone home. Since then, District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath's office has stated that tip lines connected to this case, both official and to the family's independent investigation led by attorney Eric Hertz, have been receiving between 50 and 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island that day or who know someone who was. That is an extraordinary volume of public engagement for a single case, and it reflects something beyond morbid curiosity. It reflects a community, and increasingly a country, that has decided this particular set of unanswered questions is worth pursuing all the way to an actual answer, not just a viral clip and a comment section argument that fades in a week. We started this video talking about who Nolan actually was before any of this happened, and we want to close the same way, because that's genuinely the standard this channel tries to hold itself to, even when a story is this contested and this emotionally loaded. If a breakdown like this one, patient of the evidence, honest about what we don't know, and careful with the people who haven't been charged with anything, is the kind of true crime coverage you actually want more of, we genuinely appreciate you making this channel part of your regular rotation rather than a one-off recommendation from the algorithm. We're a small community relative to how many of you tune in for these breakdowns, and every person who joins helps us keep doing this the right way instead of the fast way. Thank you for sitting through all 13,000 words of this with us. That says something about who's actually watching. As of this recording, both autopsy results remain pending. The joint phone inspection has not yet been publicly reported as complete. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has stated the investigation remains active. A grand jury has not yet been convened. Every one of those developments could reshape this case significantly in either direction, and we will be back the moment any of them become public, with the same standard we try to hold throughout this video. What's confirmed, what's disputed, and what's still simply unknown, kept in their own separate categories for you to weigh for yourself. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He cooked salmon for his parents 2 nights before he died. He was funny. He was well-liked. And by every account that isn't currently being argued about online, he made people around him feel like they mattered. Whatever this investigation ultimately determines, that part of who he was doesn't get to be up for debate. Rest easy, Nolan. We'll keep watching this one until there's an answer his family can actually stand on. Every person named in this video, on every side of this case, is a real person currently living through the hardest, most publicly scrutinized weeks of their life. Christine and Elmore Wansley are grieving a son while managing an independent investigation, a pending grand jury, and a level of public attention most people never experience. Warren, Katie, Trayston Shepard, Javon Williams, and the rest of the friend group are 18 and 19-year-olds navigating formal witness interviews, viral scrutiny, and in at least one documented case, actual death threats, all while also grieving a friend. None of that erases the legitimate, documented questions this video has walked through. But it's worth remembering, as this case continues to develop and as more clips inevitably go viral in the weeks ahead, that every name attached to this story belongs to someone who has to keep living their actual life once the cameras and the comment sections move on to whatever comes next. We built this channel around the idea that true crime coverage can be genuinely rigorous, genuinely careful with the people involved, and still be exactly the kind of story you can't stop watching. This case has tested that idea more than almost any other we've covered, and we think it's held up. If you agree, the best thing you can do is bring someone else into this community with the same standard, rather than the fastest, loudest version of the story circulating elsewhere. We'll see you in the next one, the moment there's something real to report.